right, thank you very much, Rich. Appreciate that. Did you hang on to your seats? 33 years and 33 minutes? That was a lot of information. I would like the panelists to please come up and take a seat. No particular order. As they come up, I want to keep things rolling here. It is a great group of panelists here. As they come in, I'm going to go down just in order, and I guess maybe, well, I don't think these are all my personal thoughts there, but Dr. Chris Winslow, he is the virtual director. No, Chris actually was able to join us today. He's here in person. He had a couple other commitments that, bad for them, good for us, got canceled, so we've got Chris live and in person. Chris does lots of things, but the director of the Ohio Sea Grant Program, basically over 100 years of information that's collected in Lake Erie, right at the end, the mouth of the Maumee River. Jim Stauffer, just had the opportunity to meet him today. Jim brings representation from the private sector as they started looking at the challenges on Lake Erie with a lot of tutelage from Rich right here that just spoke. It's a group of, again, private sector folks looking at what can they do to address the problem of algal blooms and the water quality on Lake Erie. Jason Anspaugh, first of all, on your question cards that are there, make sure you put a little box up there for Jason. Somehow he got omitted. Sorry about that, Jason. He is the operator of our Three Rivers filtration plant right here in Fort Wayne. Jason may take a moment to talk about how many people he provides drinking water to. We were looking at involving Jason earlier on in this year at a virtual session, and he couldn't make it because there was a shifting situation at the plant, which is always the case, and he needed to be spending his attention to that. So no rain coming in. It's a great day. Hopefully Jason gets to stay with us and finish his information. Jeff, I cut my teeth on his information about Lake Erie, algal blooms, water quality. I didn't know anything about it. I just followed him around, listened to what he said. It was amazing. He's put his dues in. He could have retired, but much like Dick Waterfield, he's decided that he wants to continue to offer. I really think it's in his blood, and I think that's the Lake Erie water that is in his blood. Jordan, I have not had a chance to meet Jordan yet, but I think he's highly respected, and he brings the farmer's perspective, and we've heard that a lot. And I think that's critical that we recognize that, because as we look at the land use throughout the western Lake Erie Basin, it can range anywhere from 60 to 85% of the land use, and we have to be mindful of that. And then finally, but not leastly, Kerry Vollmer Sanders. When I first put a foot in this SWCD bucket, I had no idea what it was. I had those guys on board on a pontoon. Everything they told me was 180 degrees from what I thought I knew. Met Kerry early on, had no idea what the heck this acronym TNC was. She was the director here of the Western Lake Erie Basins for Agriculture, and as any smart business organization does, they see talent and they put it into positions that can do more work, and she is now the Director of Ag and Engagement Strategy across the country. So welcome, panelists. Thank you very much. Much like Jeff, Rich was trying to compact 33 years into 33 minutes, we're going to take a little bit of time. Each one of the presenters are going to take a few minutes, give an overview of their perspective. I want you to listen carefully. I hope they trigger some questions in your mind. You have cards on your table. If you want more clarification, scribble down a question there. When we break for lunch, then we will come back and we will address those questions for the panelists so they can dig a little bit deeper, because the most important thing that we can say for you today is the answer to a question that you may have. So we'll get started right here with the panelists. Thank you very much. Rich.
Thank you. So this is your opportunity for a little speed dating. So they're going to get about 6 minutes. When Rich walks up behind them, that means they're starting to get it's time. Chris Winslow is coming up first. Please provide the most difficult and the most personal questions for Chris. Check his box. He deserves it. Chris?
What an unfair introduction. Thanks, Rich. So for me, the purpose of this introduction is really to talk about some of the stuff we've done in the past as a Sea Grant program, so a NOAA-funded Sea Grant program, but also director of Ohio State University Stone Lab, so the island campus on Lake Erie. So as a Sea Grant program, we have grant dollars that we manage for NOAA, specifically within the Department of Commerce. But in that role, we've actually now stepped up, and some of this happened under my predecessor, Jeff Reuter, that's with us here today. But we're managing research grant dollars from the Ohio Department of Higher Education. And I just want to say that within that harmful algal bloom research initiative under the Ohio Department of Higher Education, that we've made some great strides. And so when we look at things like how do we treat water, we've got a lot of solutions that we've been able to hand over to our water treatment facilities to remove those toxins from our water. In the human health arena, we've been able to look at what are the impacts of these toxins on humans when we come in contact with them, whether through drinking water or recreation. We've made a lot of progress in just understanding how the blooms behave. So when are they up in the water column, down in the water column? When do they produce toxins? When don't they? And then last but not least is how we lower nutrient inputs into the system. And so there's been a lot of progress in this space. Since 2015, almost $14 million have been spent in this space. But what I can tell you is not only have we done some amazing things, we've got a lot of work ahead of us, and Rich has alluded to that. This is not unique to us, but also something in the Chesapeake Bay. And so to help set kind of the stage for the panel discussion going forward, I want to say that there are still a bunch of research gaps that are out there. And so what we're squarely focused on right now is helping the DNR out, specifically on identifying how do we construct and maintain and manage wetlands. In partnership with the Ohio Department of Ag, they set priorities for the research that we fund also, and really working at manure management. So how do we use manure? How do we incorporate it into the soils? Looking at cost-benefit analysis for subsurface placement. Many of the management practices we'll talk about, they have pluses, but there's also some cons associated with that, and that's often the con is the economics behind those. Ag has really stepped up in Ohio, and I know they have in Indiana too, is looking at how climate change is going to impact agriculture in the future, and so we're looking to fund research in that space. Looking at drainage water management. In Lake Erie, we know that this is not only a nutrient management question that we're trying to address, but it's also a water management question that we need to be looking at. And also for the EPA and the Department of Health in Ohio, really still looking at source protection. You know, these blooms do have the ability to produce toxins, and we need to make sure that we can remove those toxins effectively, both just from a reduction standpoint, but also cost effectively. And then what I wanted to mention too within this agricultural space, and it's not me up here pointing a finger at ag necessarily, we just know a lot of those nutrients coming into the system are related to ag practices. We've got a lot of work in that space. Tremendous things have been done. I'm proud of Ohio and our governor and the H2 Ohio initiative, which I will talk a little bit about later today. We are funding a lot of the management practices that need to be on the landscape, but I would argue that we need to increase those efforts. And it's not lack of a want for participation from farmers, it's just there's millions of acres in that watershed, and it takes a bit to mobilize those practices. But a lot of our research and modeling is showing that we need, for cover crops and for buffer strips and for drainage water control structure, we need to be in the 70 to 80% of the acreage in some of these sub-watersheds and the Maumee itself. And I would also argue, you know, when we say best management practices, I try and avoid that phrase because there is no best. We've got to recognize that a farm field isn't a farm field isn't a farm field, and that these are really just different management practices that play a role in different landscapes. But I will mention that going out and putting one management practice on your field is not going to be enough. We know that what we have to do is what we're referring to in the academic community is stacked practices. We've got to find multiple things that we can be doing on our acres that are in agricultural practices. And I wish that was it. I wish we could just say if we put all these management practices out there to control runoff associated with, you know, an annual event, rain event, was enough. But we're learning more and more about what we call legacy phosphorus. And that legacy phosphorus is defined in many, many ways. When I look at it through that lens, it's basically the phosphorus that's already out there. It's not the relationship we have with phosphorus and nitrogen, I apologize, on an annual basis, the fall before a cropping season or the spring before a cropping season, but it's the stuff that's already out there. And so we need to be thinking about these management practices that we're using and how they address not only our current relationship with nutrients on our agricultural fields, but also, you know, addressing the past nutrients that are out on the field. I don't want to focus all on ag, although the bulk of the nutrients are coming from that landscape. We do need to still work at our septic tanks that are located across the landscape, and we also know that we still have a contribution that's coming from our wastewater treatment plants. So when we talk about a 40% reduction, and I look forward to the panel discussion here, this is an all hands on deck thing we're working with right now. So if we know that 9% of the phosphorus at the end of the Maumee River is coming from wastewater treatment plants, if we want to reach our overall goal of a clean Lake Erie, that 9% has to become at least 5%. That 40% reduction has to be attributed to all the inputs. And Rich did a great job of highlighting, again, this is all hands on deck. This is wastewater treatment plant, this is urban centers, and this is ag. So I'll stop there and let Rich introduce your next panelist. Thank you.
Chris, I was looking forward to kind of bumping you off the stage there. Goodness, man. So we're fortunate to have Jim representing sort of the business community and the foundation. And I tell you, in the Chesapeake region, foundations were extremely important to funding the work. So, Jim?
Good morning. I had a spectacular trip over across Ohio and Indiana this morning, coming from Port Clinton, Ohio, Catawba Island. Many of you know Cedar Point, Put-in-Bay, the island region. We've been blessed to be in that part of the world now as a family business for over 50 years. And my involvement on Lake Erie has been a lifetime pursuit, but most importantly, over the last 10 years, we recognize that the quality of Lake Erie, the quality of our water source is paramount to our success as a business and as a community. The Lake Erie Foundation was formed about 5 years ago, group of local business, farmers, fishermen, the whole spectrum of those who use and enjoy the lake and are passionate about the future of Lake Erie. I think in particular, the Lake Erie Foundation became known as a voice for the lake. There were obviously the academic and the technical side, the scientific. I am the least likely candidate to be on this panel today. I am not built from that structure. But as a businessman, and as a father, and as someone who's lived in our community all these years, I knew that the Lake Erie needed a voice to carry it forward in a positive way. Rich has done a great job. This is the third or fourth time I've seen his presentation, and I always come away inspired when I hear it. Certainly, I think the number one thing people relate to Lake Erie is tourism. We have over 11 million visitors to Lake Erie, just in Ohio alone, in our region, so it is impactful. About $16 billion of commerce. Think about the daily trips, the food, the beverage, the fishing, the dockage, all the different real estate activity. $16 billion, which is, to me, a staggering amount of money, but it's impactful because it is part of the conversation. 130,000 jobs. Think of all the people who have to work in these industries, and that is basically focused on the 8 counties that buffer Lake Erie alone. That doesn't include New York or Pennsylvania, Ontario, Michigan. It is just parts of Ohio that have that impact. Charter fishermen alone, 800 charter fishing captains who basically take out 800,000 individuals on fishing trips each year. So that is a significant kind of barometer of what's going on in the activity that's happening. 900,000 licenses, and the fishermen alone are about $1 billion impact. We have 600,000 registered boats in the Ohio region. That's the Ohio Department of Watercraft alone. $3.5 billion impact to our community, and over 270 marinas that dock and store and fuel and provide bait and other supplies. You know, my background is in hospitality. I'm in the marine business, but in particular, I always think back to my great-great-grandparents who were in fact farmers in Medina, Ohio. I think about the society and the culture they grew up in and what it meant to them. And when you come from that legacy of over 100 years in the ag community and being in the food business today, it gives me a great appreciation for the dynamics of what we're faced with. I think in particular, we believe at the Lake Erie Foundation that the ag community can be profitable and we can still have clean water. We've come to recognize over time we're making progress, but it is about events like this. It's about people like this. It's the expertise we have at our disposal of coming together. There has to be mutual respect. There has to be an appreciation for both sides of the argument. As I drove over here today, as I mentioned, you've got the Black Swamp, the beautiful ag community as you drive on Route 24. It is the backbone of our economy in Ohio. I'm sure it's a tremendous backbone of the economy in Indiana. So when we look at ag, we recognized at the Lake Erie Foundation, we weren't here to be of conflict. We were here to join in the conversation to help ag be successful and to help our communities. Yes, we're involved in the algal blooms. We're also involved in plastics. We're also involved in wind turbines that might go into Lake Erie. But in particular, we recognize it's the clean water, it's the algal blooms that we have to focus on. And we know that the people at this table and the people in this conversation today can move forward. The comments have been made. H2 Ohio is a significant step forward for the state of Ohio. We've got excellent directors of ODNR, Ag, Fish and Wildlife, and Joy Mullinex of the Lake Erie Commission. Their leadership is taking the state legislature and our initiatives to another level. We also know that as we go forward, that we believe the food industry and the hierarchy of what drives our communities. We need nutrition. We need young adults to know they can get up in the morning and have a wholesome and worthwhile meal. We think about the health of our communities, the health of our country. It starts with great food. Great food starts with ag. So we need to recognize that this conversation is vertically integrated, and the more people we bring to the table, bring to these symposiums, the more likely we are to come up with solutions that are not only sustainable, but that still drive the economic success of our communities in this country. So it's a pleasure to be here as part of the Lake Erie Foundation, and we look forward to kind of adding a little bit of diversity to the conversation. And I commend you all for coming together to organize today's event. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. So Jason's going to step up now, being one of those people that have got to, so you're sort of midstream, Jason. You're gathering water and then sending it somewhere downstream.
That's right. Thanks for inviting me today. I'm Jason Ansball. I'm acting superintendent at the Three Rivers Water Filtration Plant here in Fort Wayne. I spent half my life living here in Indiana and half of it growing up in Ohio. And over there, both my grandparents had small farms, and one of the most thrilling memories I have was using a three-bottom plow with an old 1960s Ford tractor, my grandpa's farm, and hitting a vein of clay, and that thing just popping straight up in the air. So a lot of good memories there. But now my focus is to coordinate the efforts of our plant here to provide as much safe drinking water as we need here in our community. And we have about 300,000 people in this area, around 100,000 connections that need that. And every month it's about 1.3 or 1.4 billion gallons of water that we're treating and delivering to the folks here in the community. So it's helpful for us, to have that basis for our industry, for our health, and for our well-being. But we are very much concerned in watching every day the quality of the water that comes in the door. That's part of the thrilling part of what we've done. I started here as an analytical chemist and then spent the majority of my career as a plant operator and a chief operator here at our plant. And every day you walk in and say, what is our raw water quality and how do we have to adjust our treatment to adjust for that and take into that account, because we want to take all of those variables and have a productive and a consistent product at the end that people can count on. Because you've got medical facilities and food facilities and industry and everybody who's brushing their teeth and making their coffee that needs that to be consistent. I've been on shift when our turbidity, that's one of the measurements that we use for water quality, where the raw turbidity has gone from 100 NTU, it's nephelometric turbidity units anyway, the clarity of the water, how much it disperses light, to 800 over the course of 8 hours because of a rain event that we didn't even know about. It was upstream. Our headwaters start near Hillsdale, Michigan, come down through part of Ohio, then come down through the farmlands of Indiana here, and then of course we always joke with the wastewater folks that they're sending them all of the water that we send out, they're sending back to the river to go on up to Defiance and on over to the Lake Erie. So anyway, it's good work. Love doing it. Glad to be able to contribute in this way, and look forward to talking with you about what your questions and concerns are. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. So Jeff, I've added 5 minutes onto your presentation. You can talk about Chris if you so desire.
I think I'll start with talking about Chris. That seems like a popular topic. If I could get my slides loaded up here, or maybe they already are. Let me try and move. Oh, very good. Thank you much. I'm going to try to rapidly go through and bring you up to speed a little bit on what's happening with Lake Erie right now, and sort of historically also what we've seen on the lake. Whoop. Boy, that is fast. Let's get back this up. That was one touch. Okay. Could I possibly ask you guys to, oh, they're getting it fixed? Okay. If I touch it again, will it jump? Try it?
Jeff, thank you for your presentation.
That's all right, that's all right, yeah. It could be good. I can just ask you guys to, should I? Should I try to operate it, or I should let, try it? I'll ask you to move it. Okay, very good, very good. Go ahead and let's start with the first slide. Whoop. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start talking a little bit. Let's get, so we can keep moving here. But essentially, when we look at the harmful algal bloom issue on Lake Erie, it's not new. And you're going to see in a minute an image of my hand in front of Stone Laboratory up at Put-in Bay in Lake Erie from 1971, when I first started working on research on Lake Erie, and another one from 2013. And essentially, the problem that we had in the 1970s is back. And we solved that problem from the 1970s, first starting in 1972 when we passed the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. Nixon and Trudeau signed that. That would be Trudeau Sr. And that allowed us to bring together groups of scientists and allowed us to determine that phosphorus was indeed what we needed to limit. In fact, we needed to reduce the amount of phosphorus going into the lake by 60%. That was our goal in the 1970s. And later in 1972, that fall, we passed the Great Lakes the Clean Water Act. And the Clean Water Act really allowed us to target and regulate point sources. And fortunately, in those days, 70% of the phosphorus coming into Lake Erie was coming from poor sewage treatment. So we improved sewage treatment plants by 75 to 90%, the ones flowing into Lake Erie. And by doing that, we reduced the total load of phosphorus going into the lake by 60%. The lake responded and became the walleye capital of the world. We hit our target in 1981. Very good. Are you running it or am I? I can now? Great. Thank you much. So as we look at phosphorus, we know that it causes the harmful algal blooms, and we know that nitrogen is also important. We should be trying to reduce both because in many ways nitrogen controls how toxic these blooms become. We can talk more about that in question and answer if you're interested. But Rich brought up earlier the dead zone in the Chesapeake, the dead zone in Lake Erie, the area below the thermocline in the central basin, the cold bottom layer becomes anoxic each summer, and that's also controlled by the amount of phosphorus that comes into Lake Erie. And just this past September, September 4th of this year, we had a serious problem in east of Cleveland where we had fish kill and methane smell coming up onto the shoreline, and everyone's drinking water was filled with dissolved manganese. If we look at these blooms, the toxins that are produced, what I've done here is put the most toxic things at the top, the least toxic things at the bottom. The 4 in red are the primary algal toxins. Number 2,1 microcystin LR is what caused the Toledo water crisis in 2014. You see that all 4 algal toxins are more toxic than cyanide, which is about 2/3 of the way down the page. If we look at where our phosphorus is coming from, here we are sitting at the Maumee at Fort Wayne here, and this is the biggest loader of phosphorus to any of the Great Lakes. In fact, the load out of the Maumee in 2008, 3,800 tons, is about 4 times larger than any other tributary around the Great Lakes. If we look at just phosphorus from the Maumee now, we're seeing that 70 to 90% of it comes in during the 10 largest storm events. So we've got to focus on those storm events. That's when the load's coming in. And we can also see that it's primarily coming from agricultural runoff. About more than 85% is ag runoff. It's not lawn care, it's not combined sewer overflows, and it's not failing septic tanks. Those are very small portions of the load. If we look at phosphorus itself, back in the 1970s, we focused only on total phosphorus. Total phosphorus is a combination of particulate phosphorus, that's phosphorus attached to sediment particles, and dissolved phosphorus. Particulate phosphorus is about 25% bioavailable, utilizable by our crops, our grass, or the algae. The DRP, the dissolved phosphorus, is 100% usable, 100% bioavailable, and it's the DRP that's driving this. In fact, I can tell you, when we're sitting here at Fort Wayne during a high flow event, DRP from Fort Wayne reaches Lake Erie within 24 hours. It's that fast. And when it gets out in the lake, it's what fuels the harmful algal blooms. And our models right now are based on total bioavailable phosphorus. And this is important when we think about how we're going to manage agriculture in the future and the things we want to recommend as best management practices. Our models tell us we can determine how big the bloom is going to be by taking the total amount of the dissolved phosphorus, and we only need to measure 8% of the particulate phosphorus. That's the only thing that's really driving these blooms. If we look at the blooms historically now, or since 2002, we've been measuring them with satellites, and on this image, the black images is no harmful algal bloom. The red is a really dense harmful algal bloom. If you look at 2002, which is, 2012, which is the lower image, let's see, I may be able to point at that here. Yeah, 2012 over here. That's what we would like blooms to look like. We want them that big or smaller 9 years out of 10. The bloom from 2008, if we reduced that bloom by 40%, it would look like 2012. You see the giant blooms over here in 2011 and 2015. If we reduced those blooms by 40%, they would look like the bloom from 2008. All right, when we look at our targets, what we've come up with, I was the U.S. chair of the team of 25 scientists that came together, and we looked at reducing the amount of phosphorus. We know that to control harmful algal blooms, we need to reduce the spring load by 40%. To control the dead zone, we need to reduce the annual load by 40%. And it's also important, the U.S. and Canada agreed to those targets in 2016. And this is key. We recommended we measure our progress by looking at flow-weighted mean concentration. Rich, I'm going to fly through a couple of these. It's really important right now that you understand that we can still predict our how much phosphorus comes in simply by measuring what the flow is out of the Maumee River. What we've done on these images, the dark line, I'm going to show you 6 of these. The dark line represents the amount of phosphorus that came in, the load from 2002 to 2018. The dotted lines on either side give you the prediction intervals. Just as Rich showed on the Chesapeake, what we'd like to see is loads that are coming in and they're outside, they're lower than this dotted line. We see that in 2019. But 2020 and 2021 are right on the line. Again, 2019 for dissolved phosphorus, 2020 and 2021. The reason 2019 is down there lower, that was a very wet spring. We couldn't plant 1 million acres. the amount of manure and phosphorus, the amount of manure and commercial fertilizer applied was greatly reduced. Overall, phosphorus applications went down by 62%, and we saw the impact of that immediately. It didn't take a long time to see the impact. We saw the impact immediately. So far on the load, you can't measure progress by looking at load. You need to look at flow-weighted mean concentration. The last 2 years, the discharge has been lower. It's the first time since 2008 that that's happened. Because of that, not because of anything we've done, but because the discharge has been lower, we're seeing 2 years of low bloom. So it's not representing progress, it's simply low flow. And the last one I'm going to show, Rich, no, I got one more after this one. This is flow-weighted mean concentration, same way I showed on discharge. But in this case, you can see the flow-weighted mean concentration for bioavailable phosphorus in 2019. We applied less. It was below what we would have predicted. In fact, this is a 30% improvement. We were within 10% of our target in 2019 because we applied less phosphorus. 2020 and 2021, we were right on our line. For particulate phosphorus, we were way above the line in 2020. But the bottom line, because of this, and maybe it's shown even better on this last one, if we look at, again, we track our progress based on what the flow-weighted mean concentration is. Flow-weighted mean concentration for dissolved phosphorus in 2021 was 0.082. In 2008, it was 0.080, and the average from 08 to 2018 is 0.080. We've seen no progress with the actions that we're currently doing. During the question and answer, I can give you some reasons that I think we haven't seen any progress, even based on what many actions that farmers are taking. Thanks. Sorry.
Jordan? Yep. Good to have the Farm Bureau here.
Thank you. Well, I guess I have to follow the zero progress talk, so that was part of my notes. I'm Jordan Haywood. I'm the Director of Water Quality and Research with Ohio Farm Bureau. Previously with Scott's Miracle-Gro, so I have an undergraduate in turf science and then environmental science master's. So I've been able to play both sides of the fence here on the phosphorus topic. So it's always good to have Scott's lifted up with their efforts of reducing P. Since the Toledo water crisis in 2014, Ohio Farm Bureau and Ohio Agriculture have not ducked the situation. We've stepped up to say, hey, we understand the landscape, we understand, where phosphorus is coming from, and this is how we're going to talk to our members. If you see me talk or engage with our members, we push people back on, is it geese, is it lawns, is it deer, is it septic? We push back on all that. We say, take care of your piece of land and do what you can that works well with your business. So that's our message since 2014 is just stick your head down on your land, get it done, pay attention to what works, and pick and choose what works with your topography, with your nutrient management plan, with whatever you have on your farm. And so that's been our message overall. We've tried to accelerate that messaging by partnering with NRCS, the Farm Bureau has with the Blanchard River Demonstration Farms Network. So that's a few farms in the Findlay area that do what the title says, is demonstrates practices that we think either older ones that we want to highlight or maybe newer ones that we'd like to maybe get a little more eyeballs on, get a little bit more data on, especially as we shift more towards maybe less nutrient management focus or maybe equal focus on water management as well. So there's a two-stage ditch on one of the farms. There's drainage water management control structures. There's all sorts of things that we're trying to do to showcase what can be done on a farm in Western Lake Erie Basin. We're also a big supporter of the edge of field monitoring system, so we're not ducking, what the numbers are. We want more monitoring. We want numbers. Our farmers respond really well to data, to numbers. So if a certain practice says yes or no, then they're going to follow that more likely. Judging from what Chesapeake Bay is doing, I've always felt we're woefully behind on monitoring. We have Waterville and we have stations throughout, but I think in order to get farmers engaged more, we really do need to keep narrowing and narrowing those networks to get down to the field level. There's a lot that happens between the field and the lake, and definitely more monitoring needs to come in between those two systems. I think, Ohio in particular is really, we're fast approaching a really good cohesiveness in our state. We're just, I think, year 3 or year 2 into the Ohio Agricultural Conservation Initiative. So it's a group of all the ag commodity groups, animal and crop, Farm Bureau, conservation groups, environmental groups. We're all on one group to run a couple different projects that we feel is at least a start of the cohesiveness that we need in the state to model what the Chesapeake Bay has done to get everyone on the same table and everyone on everyone at the table to keep the rhetoric at a very even-keeled level. And I think that's what people respond to the best. 2 projects that OACI is involved with is a farmer certification program. So we begged, borrowed, and stole from the MEAT program in Michigan and stuff done in Illinois, the STAR, I think it's called the STAR program, and we took pieces and parts and are trying to help farmers move up the conservation ladder. So give them a score of how they're doing on their farm, not to be negative or overly positive, just here's where you're at this season, and then here are some resources and some targets for you to maybe add a couple things with the help of EQIP from NRCS or H2 Ohio from the state of Ohio. I say this, and I also, the caveat is ag's not infallible in this situation, right? I mean, I'm going to talk about progress and things that have happened, but we're not infallible. You can't, use We Feed the World as a shield for any progress or any poking of adverse, groups. Environmental advocacy is great for farmers. It's made us evolve over the years. I grew up on a pig farm. The pig farm that my father grew up with was a lot different than the one that I grew up with, and it's going to continue to evolve. Good positive pressure with data is good for farmers, and I think we've shown over the decades, either by the active ingredients that we put on our fields, by the types of nutrients, the timing, the facilities that our animals are in, the animal husbandry that we've put forth, we will evolve, and we are willing to evolve. And so it's just a matter of how it's being pushed onto farmers, and is there data that keeps them believing that that's the right topic. So I kind of have 4 buckets I want to talk about here quickly. One is addressing the zero progress, and I think my counterpart at Ohio Farm Bureau, Larry Antosh, some of you may know, he's been around for a long time. I call him Larry Lag Time because he keeps hitting. It's either Larry Lag Time or Larry Legacy, referring to Legacy P. And the lag time of having to increase the adoption rates of some of these practices on millions of acres and seeing the result of the lake, I think, is coming into play a little bit. But we have started down that path. In 2015, we passed Senate Bill 150, which is a fertilizer certification program. So, farmers have to document their fertilizer applications and really have some accountability to say, okay, I've been educated by Ohio State or by ODA, and then they have some accountability for where their nutrients are going. The other one is Senate Bill 1. So Rich had the snow-covered application out there. Well, you can't do that in Western Lake Erie Basin. You can't do frozen or snow-covered application. You can't do saturated soil applications of manure. And also there's weather restrictions on when you can do manure or fertilizer. So that's a big deal. So our farmers have to know when that forecast is coming through when they do apply their nutrients. Soil test P levels are trending down for the most part. So we're seeing a better trend of pulling phosphorus out of the soil. Less fertilizer is being applied on the whole. So that's also a good indication that we're using our VRT technology. We're using nutrient management plans to keep ticking that down. The next bucket is voluntary doesn't work. So we've had a 50% increase in cover crops since 2012. Still need way more, but we're seeing bigger and better adoption, which H2 Ohio is helping with. VRT has increased dramatically, and we even, that's obviously for fertilizer, but we're even using it for manure on the demonstration farm. So really showing that a hog farmer can dial up and down that high volume of manure depending on their soil test levels. And then with H2 Ohio, there's 2 million practice acres that have been enrolled in the first year. So that's a huge, huge deal. I think there's 3 or 4 million farming acres there. The rollout meetings that we had with ODA, we saw 400 or 500 farmers at meetings, and we weren't even giving away like a hitch pin or like a hat or anything. So that was a big deal to get them there to sign up for things. And our soil and water folks are saying across the board that we are seeing farmers, older farmers, that we've never seen come into our office before. That is huge, huge change. I don't know what they're signing up for, if they're signing up, but they're at least coming out of their piece of land to see what's going on. Manure will also probably be hit on today. Obviously, manure is the building block of a healthy soil, increased organic matter and water holding capacity, something that we need as we have higher water holding needs across the soil. It makes up about 20% of the nutrients applied in the Western Lake Erie Basin, so it probably gets the inverse amount of attention, but it's still a pretty low part of the nutrients that are being applied. And then whatever happens to manure, some people call for it to be treated like, sewage coming out of a municipality. But that pee is still pee. It still has to go somewhere, and we're not allowed to straight pipe into any waterway. So it really limits what farmers can do on their land. And I think that the no discharge of any farmers, CAFO or small, definitely doesn't get talked about near as much. My last part is in-season application seems to be less and less important in this whole thing. We're obviously going to continue to keep drilling down on how much nutrients are needed in season, but legacy phosphorus is a big deal. It's something that's almost as slippery as just DRP as a whole, just to try to figure out how do we mine that phosphorus out of the soil and get it done. Even still, edge of field monitoring shows us that we're losing a half pound of phosphorus per acre, still a pretty small amount, which makes it really hard for my job. I wish it was actually more so that we could find better solutions to get that, but it's still a very small amount. But it's I talk about it as grain of sands that are making a sand dune eventually. It's still important, and we still have to find a way to fractionalize that poundage. Our farmers are losing 5 field days in the spring and 5 in the fall due to climate change. And you will hear farmers perk their ear up way more to climate change than what you have seen maybe 3 to 5 years ago. With weather patterns, we're seeing 50% increase in 1 inch or more rains over the last 30 years. So they are obsessed with the weather, and they will tell you that they understand that the weather is changing. Obviously, climate change got politicized quite a bit, but they know there's an effect of sulfur in their soil, water coming off their land, rainfall amounts, temperatures, overnight temperatures. They understand what's going on, and you'll see farmers increasingly come more and more to the table. So that's kind of the end of my pitch. As an older millennial, I'll also say that I have a podcast, which is pretty typical of my generation. But it's Field Day with Jordan Haywisher. So if you do want to listen to people like Dr. Winslow and other people around the Midwest talk about kind of taking their seminar down to a relaxed kind of one-on-one conversation, that is also something you can look up. So thank you.
Kerry, we're depending on you to wrap it up and make these guys look good.
Well, that's not a hard job. Good morning, everyone. Almost afternoon, I suppose. So I'm from the Nature Conservancy. I'm not sure how many of you know who the Nature Conservancy is, but it's a private nonprofit that works in every state in the country and around 73 countries in the world. And our motto is to conserve the lands in which and waters in which all life depend. So conserve, not preserve. Conserve for food production, conserve for wildlife, conserve for people. So I also, like Jordan, grew up on a hog farm in Northwest Ohio, and when I was my first science fair project, I took 2 of my mom's really nice 9x11 pans, and I put, I made little fields, and then I propped them up on an angle. I think it was supposed to represent 4% slope. It's been a little while. But then I grew grass in the one pan and left the other pan plain, just with the soil on it. And then because I grew up in a hog farm, I had lots of hog manure, and I essentially applied manure to my mom's pans to see what would happen. And it was the most aromatic of all of the science fair projects. But what is still true today is if you want to keep manure where it's at, you have to have something holding that soil in place. What I learned back then, I had no idea I would still be doing this today, is that manure and soil will move if it's on a slope. The manure was liquid manure, so it had water in it. So, soil moves with water, nutrients move with water. So we're still back to that basic premise that I learned in, my high school science fair project. And I think that's a lot of what we're talking about today is getting back to the basics in some regards. When I started at the Nature Conservancy about 11 years ago, I was told, Kerry, just pretend you have 10 years to do your job, and you want to work your way out of a job. What can you do in those 10 years? And I think it was said earlier today how important people are. You might have said that, Rich. It really is about the people. And one of the first things that I did is I talked with Greg Lake and met him. He's in charge of the Allen County Soil and Water. I met Tim Bamba, and we started talking about what we could do together. It wasn't too far afterwards that, I met Dan Wire, and we started taking people to the lake. Making it real, making that connection from fort to port, that started probably 10 years ago, and it has been really helpful in building partnership, building an understanding, and I think we still need to do more of that. One of the things that we started we started meeting in 2012. We didn't actually have anything put together until 2014, is something called the 4R certification program. And 4Rs, if you're not familiar, is the right rate of fertilizer at the right time, in the right place, using the right source. And this certification program is not for farmers. It is for their crop advisors. If you talk to any farmer about the decisions they make for nutrient management, they're going to tell you that they have a couple of advisors. One of them is their ag retailer, their crop advisor. Another might be their soil and water office. Another might be the NRCS office or extension. So this certification program is for them, and when we were putting it together, we had support from input from groups in Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. We had scientists, we had government officials, we had Farm Bureau, the Nature Conservancy. We were all there in the room putting this together and agreeing on the science, agreeing on the best practices that we could put into that certification. And the thought was, if we could get another 10% of the crop advisors to become 4R certified every year, that third-party auditor would come in and validate that, yep, they are making the best advice, they are helping the farmers make the best choices with nutrient management. If we could get 10% every year in 10 years, we would have 100% of the acres in Western Lake Erie Basin following the best advice, the best science that we had for nutrient management. We've fallen a little bit short. We're at about 3 million acres, and I still think every agribusiness, every ag retailer, every crop advisor should become 4R certified. Not just so that you can show your farmers that you are advanced, but also to make sure that you are helping agriculture stay in Western Lake Erie Basin, that you are helping do what the Nature Conservancy supports, and that is it's people and nature. It's agriculture and bird watching, right? It's fishermen and farmers. We've got to work together on this. And those voluntary programs are only going to stay voluntary if you actually adopt them. This is what I get a little bit motivated about. We can have all the voluntary programs that we want, but if we don't have people signing up for them, if we don't have adoption of them, are they really working? Probably not. The great thing about Allen County Soil and Water is it has great people like Tim and Greg and Courtney and Michaela, Janelle. They're all pulling together, and they have a network of people to help farmers. And I know I'm just talking about the farming community because that's what I know about, but there's been research from Linda Prokope in Purdue to say that if a farmer is going to change practices, if they're going to change equipment, they need that network to help them make those best decisions, because it's not easy or cheap to change practices. The other thing that the Nature Conservancy has done is we have enlisted farmer advocates for conservation. So right now there's 12, pretty soon there'll be 45, but it's farmers learning from other farmers, having field days, sharing education, sharing the changes that are happening and working for them both from a profitability standpoint and also just with their own personal farm. I see that I'm getting the hook. I have one last thing, and the Ecosystem Service Market Consortium. Maybe you've heard of markets. Carbon markets are really like all the rage right now. Water is as important as carbon, and I'll continually say that, but ESMC, there is a pilot project in Western Lake Erie Basin through the Conservation Technology Innovation Center, and farmers can now participate in those markets. It's a beautiful thing to see such an interest. Bayer Crop Science has come on board to partner with CTIC, and just one more way, one additional partner to bring in to support adding cover crops, adding the no-till, and helping our waters. Thank you.
Join me in thanking our speed dating team up front here. Thank you, guys.